Welcome to today's webinar, the 101, Multi-Factor Authentication Unpacked. My name is Mark Levine and I am the Deputy Director of your New York State Association of Counties. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate in this third in a series of cybersecurity trainings, webinars co-sponsored by NYSAC, the New York Conference of Mayors, the Association of Towns, the New York Municipal Insurance Reciprocal, and the Center for Technology and Government at the University of Albany. A key step in improving your county's cybersecurity posture is to strengthen your defenses. Since multi-factor authentication, or MFA as it's mostly referred to, can prevent as much as 80 to 90% of cyber attacks, it is often one of the first defenses that is recommended and often required, especially by insurance companies, for all counties and local governments to implement. This discussion will unpack the details of this hot cybersecurity topic, including what it is and why it's important to keep your county safe, when and where you should use it to secure access, and how you can implement it effectively and efficiently in your county or local government. At this time, I want to turn it over to Jeanette Stanziano, NYSAC Director of Education and Training, for a few housekeeping announcements about today's webinar.
Thank you, Mark. I just want to let everyone know that we will be recording this webinar and posting on NYSAC's website under webinars, under the archive section. Just look for today's date. We'll also be posting a PDF of the slide deck presented. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar. We ask you to do so in writing via your dashboard. Simply click on your questions tab, type in your question, and send it to us, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation during Q&A. Thanks so much. Back to you, Mark.
Special thanks to our speaker today, Kimberly Biddings. Kim is the Vice President of Product for BioKey International. She's got over 10 years of cybersecurity and identity and access management market knowledge and experience, which was gained across multiple authentication and cybersecurity firms. Now as the VP of Product at BioKey International, Kimberly is focused on driving growth and deployments of BioKey's IAM and identity-bound biometric solutions. She continues to be a thought leader and advocate for evolving the way organizations and people approach cybersecurity in our everyday lives. Kim is a good friend of NYSAC. She has been at our conferences, and she also attends all NACO conferences and has been a cybersecurity speaker for NACO for a couple of years now. Kim, thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark, for the stellar introduction. And, you know, as anybody who's met me knows, this is one of my favorite subjects, not even just at BioKey, but have been talking about this subject for quite a while. As Mark mentioned, you know, one of the first things I'd like to highlight is just, you know, why am I here today? Why are you kind of, you know, listening to me as far as expertise and credibility in terms of multi-factor authentication and really cybersecurity in general? Look, I've 10 years in cybersecurity. Originally, I was going to be a baking and pastry art major. I guess that's the fun fact for the day today. But I landed in cybersecurity in my first days of my career and have just loved it ever since. It's really an amazing subject and one that continues to impact all of our lives and becomes even more important as we move forward in every single year that we go forward. I work with customers and more than happy to talk to any of you on the line today or listening in terms of understanding what is multi-factor authentication and how you can implement it effectively. It really is a change management challenge in most of the sense. The technology that we have or that other vendors have, it's fairly straightforward, but getting people involved and getting people to adopt it is really a big challenge for MFA, and we'll talk about that a little later on. As Mark mentioned, I have presented recently, actually as early as last week, with Rita Reynolds from NACO, as well as Commissioner Graham from Audrain County, Missouri, who's one of our valued customers. And you can see just some of the counties that I've worked with here at BioKey as some of those customers, and of course, some of the fellow counties out there in New York, and really enjoyed the NISAC Legislative Conference where we sponsored the cybersecurity workshop. So very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. So the first thing I do want to talk about, and most cybersecurity presentations start here, is why are we talking about this in the first place, right? Why is this such a critical subject? And it all goes back to risk, right? So cybersecurity controls, such as multi-factor authentication, and we're going to break that down, unpack it, as we said, really is about trying to reduce the risk of attack, right? Fundamentally speaking, that is why we put in these controls. And so I think this has become kind of a subject that you're hearing at pretty much in every meeting you're in at this point. It's even on primetime television. I've had my Uber driver ask me about ransomware one time when I was traveling. And so it's just a mainstream subject, and that's because it's happening so often where that attack is actually occurring. You can see some of the stats here, I think really somewhat scary or maybe impressive if you think about it that way, but 4,000 ransomware attacks are taking place around the world daily. We're seeing about a 300% increase in cybercrime, and that really goes to the impact that COVID had, right? We all went remote. We all moved to these services that were no longer in the four walls of the county or the buildings that you operate. And so cyber attackers also had somewhat of a field day. They said, great, you know, all these systems that have now had to very quickly transform and become digital and allow people to access remotely. Unfortunately, the cyber criminals also saw that as an opportunity. And so there's been a significant increase in that. And then as Mark mentioned, one of the most compelling reasons that people are asking me about multi-factor authentication is cyber insurance. So remember, cyber risk is the game, right? We're trying to reduce that risk that you have. And cyber insurance is essentially always measuring that risk and applying a premium towards that, just like you have car insurance or any type of insurance that you may have. And so what we're seeing is cyber insurance is requiring multi-factor authentication as a baseline. And what that means is they actually will refuse to renew a policy or insure you for the first time, or we've seen hikes of about 200 to 300% even in premiums if people aren't willing to have multi-factor in place. And actually there was a recent case of an insurance provider going to court to actually rescind the policy from an organization that falsely claimed how they were using MFA. The webinar I did last week with Commissioner Graham, he said that his questionnaire for cyber insurance went from about 2 questions to 2.5 pages, and it was a rate increase of about 65% in 1 year. So that's been a huge driver for why people are implementing multi-factor authentication, even above and beyond regulatory compliance. Now, counties, right, of all sizes are being impacted. You know, oftentimes when I'm at events, NACO, for example, we see a lot of stories around very large counties talking about cyber improvements. And then there's a lot of questions I get on what do I do if I'm a smaller county, right? What do I do if I don't have a lot of IT resources? And so MFA is a subject that really all counties need to tackle and put in place. And probably a subject for a different session, but always happy to help you kind of right size that multi-factor authentication. But these are just some of the examples, right? New Jersey County being hit by ransomware. You're seeing also recently in New York County, as many of you know, as early as September was actually breached as well, letting their residents know they need to check their credit reports. And then services for 3 weeks were limited in a Colorado County, for example. But I do want to highlight too, this isn't recent, right? A lot of people say, oh my gosh, ransomware is now the main thing that's happening. It's now mainstream. Why didn't we know about this? And so it has been happening though for years. I think the first healthcare case that I remember reading about was about 2012. You can see here, though, 2016, there was actually a series of ransomware attacks targeting the 911 call center. And in Tennessee, they had to go back to pencil and paper for 3 days. So again, doesn't matter size, doesn't matter what systems. Unfortunately, these hackers are very, very keen on just gaining access to your systems. And so again, want to highlight that MFA we're talking about today because it has been proven to prevent up to 90% of cyber attacks, okay? Very, very important, one of the most important controls you can have. It's also topped the charts for NACO's cybersecurity priorities and best practices for 2 years in a row. I even have a sticker on my laptop that says got MFA, right, from the NACO convention. So just a very critical and hot priority. And then you're also seeing it become a hard requirement in, let's say, this case, which is obviously the federal funding, the DHS cybersecurity grant program that just came out in September. And obviously at the state level, but about 80% of that is meant to actually trickle down to state, local, territorial, and of course, county government with applications due in November. And so when I read through this, the first requirements is really that you have a detailed cybersecurity plan. And lo and behold, the first bullet point on the best practices of that cybersecurity plan is that you have to have a plan for MFA. So again, definitely a topic worth understanding, knowing more about, and getting a roadmap in place for how you're going to implement it. So we're going to open up, before I dive into the rest of the content and define MFA and break it all down, we're going to have a quick poll question. I'm definitely curious for all of you listening in, do you have MFA in place today? So I'm going to launch the poll real quick, play some Jeopardy music, give you a few minutes to answer. So your options are, you have it everywhere, all access, employees, citizens, suppliers, some access, maybe those high risk assets. We don't have it yet, and I'm not sure. Maybe you're not aware of what's in place. You may not be in IT, or you're just not aware of maybe what's been implemented yet. So give everybody just one more minute, second, I should say. All right, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So, all right, so great. We have a very high rate that some of you have it on all access. That's fantastic. And hopefully today I give you some more considerations for how you could improve it, expand it, give people some more flexibility and options. Some access, we'll talk about ways to implement it across all your users. And look, if you're not sure, hopefully we can help figure that out today and give you some more insight. All right, so what is MFA? I heard the best thing last week presenting on that webinar. It also stands for, I guess, the Missouri Farmers Association. I've had people guess. If you see me at these events, I wear a pin that says, ask me about MFA, and immediately people start to guess acronyms. Obviously, it stands for multi-factor authentication. Now, the best way to explain this is think about a front door of your house, right? So the front door of your house is essentially that barrier before anybody comes in. And on your door typically is, let's say, a lock. I have a doorbell camera. I have a PIN code, for example. And so all of those things essentially are barriers or checks and balances to say, okay, do you know these things or do you have these things to be able to unlock the door, to be able to get into my house? And things like a doorbell camera or things that offer heightened security are really trying to say, okay, are you the person that you say you are? And are you allowed to be in my house or to come into my house? And so the other flip side of that is if you don't have multi-factor authentication, it's like not having a lock at all on your front door. Okay, so that's why we keep talking about that being so critical, because yes, there's a lot of things that, let's say, a robber or a criminal can do once they get into the house, but it's that front door that they have to get through first. And if that's wide open, they end up going in and being able to do who knows what, right? So that front door analogy is the best, easiest way I can explain it. I've used it with elected officials, even IT folks, and just say, listen, you have to think about what controls you have on your front door preventing access, or at least making sure that someone knows how to get in. Digital world, it's the login screen. So what we're talking about here is this is the front door now to the things that you access. And I'll talk about what those access points are. It's not always just your computer, for example, but anytime you see a login screen and we kind of grimace because usually it's a username, password, and then you have to do some different things. This is the front door to the digital world or the digital environment. You do this every day, I can almost guarantee you, whether you're accessing your email, you're trying to access your bank account, you're logging into your kids' online schooling, right? Anywhere you see that login screen is the front door that MFA is meant to protect. Okay, so very, very straightforward from that perspective as to what is this actually doing. Now, getting into a little bit of definitions that I think are very important to understand. One is identity. So this is actually the Webster definition, right? Fact of being who or what a person or thing is. And so in day-to-day engagements, right? I've met Mark in person. If I saw him in person, I know who he is. I know who his identity is as a person. As soon as we go to digital, so we start accessing things online or our computer starts, we go into our computer, that now is called a digital identity. And so what we're trying to do is say, is that digital identity really Kim or is it really Mark in that case? And the way that we're doing that is then through authentication. So you can see there, it's really about proving or showing something to be true, genuine, or valid. So throughout all of this, as complicated and as great as acronyms as us cybersecurity folks are, you want to think about it as who is that person? And are we able to actually authenticate or show that they truly are genuinely who they say they are? Multi-factor authentication, and I'll talk about kind of these different methods we use, is the combination of multiple methods to actually verify somebody's identity. You can see on the left-hand side, going back to that door example, you have things like keys, right? Does the person have the physical key to unlock the door? Do they know the PIN code to unlock the door? Or can they scan their fingerprint to unlock the door, right? So again, these are authentication methods, whether it's your front door or it's that login screen, we're trying to prove the identity of the person or the thing that's trying to get in. Now, this is the next critical component of multi-factor authentication, and actually authentication in general, is that to be multi-factor, it really has to come from at least two of these three categories. Fun fact for everybody out there, most organizations and most logins you're doing are only two-factor. So the three categories you can see here, something you know, we all know this. These are PINs, passwords, or what's your mother's maiden name, right? Those security questions. Something you have is when you get, let's say, a code texted to your phone and you have to enter that code. It's using your phone or your device. Also things like hardware tokens. These are USB sticks or actual physical devices that people plug in and tap or touch or even click. And those are actually another thing that you have that you're implementing to do the login. And then finally, something you are, which is biometrics, right? And in that sense, could be anything from a fingerprint scan to a palm scan, facial recognition, voice. All of those are used to really prove something that you are. As you can see, two-factor, most people have, is things like a password and entering in that code, or answering a security question, putting in a password, and using a hardware device. So again, they have to be from multiple categories. True multi-factor, honestly, I don't see it implemented that often. Most of the time it's two-factor. And to be clear, they're pretty interchangeable at this point. So if your cyber insurer is saying you need to have multi-factor in place, things like a password plus a one-time password of that code that you're typing in is sufficient. But really, really important that you look for solutions when you're looking to implement this that offer you all methods from these three categories. And that will go into a little bit later when I talk about the people that have to use these things, right, such as us in our day-to-day. It's important to have options for people because not everything works for every situation. And I'll talk about that in just one moment. Now, I talked about where those front doors are, okay? Some of the most common ones that you're familiar with are applications. I did get asked, my favorite story at a NACO annual conference, when I said applications was, do you mean paper applications like job applications, right? And so just to be clear, these are obviously digital things. They're things like your email, your Gmail account is a web application. Things like your payroll environment online would be an application. And applications come in all different shapes, sizes, types. So you have web apps like a Gmail. You have mobile applications like your banking application, right? I can log into my TD Bank account on my phone. And then county, you have a lot of what we call legacy or really big, heavy applications. And those are typically something that are difficult to integrate, but very possible to protect. And they're usually very large systems or heavy systems. The other thing that you think of when you think of that front door is when you log into your computer for the first time every day, right? So when you actually access what we call the desktop, that is yet another front door that you're trying to gain access to, and again, need to protect with multi-factor authentication. And then if you're in IT or in IT services, your infrastructure, your servers, your data center, right? Those type of actual assets are other things that have front doors that need to log in. So when you're thinking about where is this applied, when I say I have access secured with MFA everywhere and all access, you really want to make sure that all your apps are included, all your devices are included, and all your infrastructure is included. Now, how do you implement multi-factor authentication? This is the next most common question I get. First is, what is it? What do I use to do it? And then we start talking about how you actually implement it. And if you've tried to implement it, more often than not, you'll have these users or people, we call users people, there are people that will say, I'm not doing that, that's difficult, or that gets in my way of getting to my email. And so, like I said, the biggest thing with MFA is that it's really a change management issue, right? The larger your county is also, the more runway you need and more change management you need to really help people understand why it's important and why they should adopt it. So these are 5 critical steps to implementing MFA. This was part of a webinar I did in 2021 with NACO on a practical path to MFA. So if anybody wants to look that one up, great session. And so there are key steps that you want to think about. We'll go through some of these in detail. But first and foremost, know where your risk is, know your situation. You want to make sure that you understand what your insurance is. The biggest tip that I can give for you folks out there is ask now your cyber insurer what the requirement is. Do not wait till renewal. Do not wait till a procurement person tells you that you're up for renewal, because again, we're seeing those questionnaires and those requirements exponentially increase over time. Picking your authentication methods, I have some great tips for that in just a moment. Defining security policies, those are really the written policies or the things that enforce what authentication or what locks, right, people have to go through to get access. Communication strategy, and then you definitely want to do a phased rollout. There's a key part of this, like I said, that remember, if you implement something at that front door, let's say you add 3 locks to the front door and you didn't give people the right key or they forget the key that day, you're going to have a lot of people that are locked out of gaining access to systems and then therefore cannot do their jobs or cannot access county services. So this is a very critical system. It's a very important one, but it can be something that if not implemented correctly, can be a big barrier for people and can actually halt productivity for a lot of people out there. So let's break some of these down. So this is what you should be thinking about before you go to implement MFA. And you can see the first thing I start with, and I tell people to start with all the time, is the person. So in this case, we have a county sheriff. You want to understand what that person does from a day-to-day perspective. You also might want to think about what they do from a month to month, year to year. Oftentimes there are transient people, right? People that aren't always accessing things like election poll volunteers, right? So those folks, you have to think about what their use case is. How do they function as people? Ask them, survey them, meet with those departments, right? Understand the people behind these systems so that you know the next piece, which is how do they work? So in this case, as the patrol car, they have a laptop in the patrol car. So they're not going into an office, obviously. They may at some point during their day, but for the most part, if they're on patrol, they're going around for a shift, they have a laptop that's in the cruiser that's there. Now, what are they doing, right? They might be doing traffic stops. They could be doing house visits. They could be on duty for traffic control, right? There's a lot of use cases for a sheriff that you would have to think about. And so the next thing is, what works for them? What would they have available to them? And then what do they access? So in this case, they're accessing very, very sensitive information, right? They're accessing personal criminal justice information about people. And so it's very, very important that that information is protected. Again, it's high risk. It's also high risk if the sheriff cannot access the system. If they're locked out, right? It's very hard for them to, let's say, call the IT help desk or get assistance while they're literally on the shift that they're on. And then finally, you want to think about what's the requirements that actually are applied to that role. So in this case, CJIS compliance is critical for this type of user, this group of people in your county. And so when you combine all of that, you have to think about, okay, what authentication methods work for this person? And then what is actually required? And so CJIS, for example, requires two-factor authentication. Don't really see a great solution being that they're going to have to pull out a mobile phone or a smartphone and start typing in codes that they get via, a text message. And so the most common thing that we see is a password plus a fingerprint scan. So again, you have to think about the use case of the person, break that down, and then apply what works best for them so that they can do their jobs efficiently. The other thing is, if it doesn't work for them, we are very good as people at circumventing controls, okay? I know plenty of people that write down passwords on sticky notes. I know people that have taped the hardware token to the middle of the office so they all can share it. Again, if it's something that causes friction for the person, they often will find a way around that control. And then that means that the attacker can find a way around that control as well. So very important you think about the people using these technologies and how they work, how they operate. When you think about the different authentication methods, and at the end I have a link to this ebook that we wrote up, they all offer different levels of usability, convenience, and security. And so again, you have to decide how risky is the information, how sensitive is this information, and so, but also how usable is it for the person. And so you can see things here, right? So that text code we all get to our phone, enter this number, it's usually 6 digits. It's higher in usability, but it's very low security, right? We're seeing hackers breach those all the time. Push notifications, right? Things that come to your phone and say, confirm or deny this authentication. You don't have to type anything in, so it's very easy to use, has very low security because now we're seeing hackers constantly prompt people until they get fed up and go, fine, confirm. It's called MFA bombing, right? New attack. So you have to think about what you're trying to protect. You can see here biometric methods. You are the credentials, so you have nothing to carry, nothing to remember, can't be forgotten or shared. High usability and also very high security because it actually authenticates who the person is when you're talking about identity-bound biometrics, which is one of the things that we focus on. So always think about the things on the right. How secure is it? Is it convenient? How much is it going to cost me, right? Some things like hardware tokens cost a lot of money. How hard is it to implement? Do I have to maintain it all the time? And one of the big things is, are people willing to use phones or not? Presenting with Audrey and County last week, they went with fingerprint at the desktop, so simple fingerprint scan to log into the computer. And that's because most county elected officials refuse to use their personal phones for authentication. So you have to think about all these factors, all these things when you're deciding what authentication methods work best. Now, you heard me mention cybersecurity policies. Policies are exactly what they sound like. They are, as defined here, your guidelines and provisions for preserving the security of your county's data and technology. In other words, they're the guidebook, right? They're the thing that you write down and you define. This is how access is going to happen. This is how authentication is going to happen. You can see here cybersecurity policies include a lot of other things that you should be defining, but in the sense of authentication, it really is the one that says, okay, the sheriff is going to be forced to use a password and a fingerprint scan every time they log into the computer. And so those are policies. The NACO Tech Exchange has some great samples that counties have provided. You can also Google security policies, and there's amazing templates out there. And then when you look at technology like BioKeys that actually we provide multi-factor authentication, that's actually an image of the admin panel as to how you make our solution work. And it is a policy. In our solution, you say, okay, this is the marketing department, and I want them to be able to use a phone, a push token, maybe some biometrics, and they're required to use two-factor authentication. That literally tells systems like ours and other competitors what authentication should be enforced in real time when that person tries to log in. So again, security policies are where you take all that information when you talk to the people, understood their workflows, knew what works best for them, and put it into the system to say, this is what you're going to enforce all the time for that person. Okay, so very, very important. The more granular the policies, the better it is because it's more customized, but it does come with more overhead. So again, you want to kind of gradually roll this out, put in some simpler policies, and then move on to more advanced or more granular policies. Look, if you have one commissioner, for example, who really can't stand phone-based, you can offer them a different method, for example, if you wanted to. So these are really the driving engine behind your MFA strategy. The next thing I'd highlight is communication is key. Absolutely key to this going well, right? Because as soon as I select all these things and I say, okay, you now have to use a password and a fingerprint to log in, you want to explain to the person you're about to do that to as to why they have to do it. The other thing that I think is an awesome recommendation that Rita Reynolds from NACO put out there is start finding cyber champions. And look, if you're not in IT, you are an amazing cyber champion waiting to be there, right? Because you can help lead the way to make change across the county. And so that's where it really comes into play of partnering with IT. Some of the most successful rollouts I've seen of this, IT partners with other entities that have no idea what this technology is, but they know they need to keep their county safe. And so you want to develop those cyber champions. You want to make sure you have clear communication. If you're at the CIO forum in NACO annual this year, this was a great session that we had. And so it was really on marketing. Believe it or not, it's how to run a marketing campaign. And this is truly the approach that needs to be taken when you start thinking about rolling out multi-factor authentication, right? Define your goals, know your audience and what motivates them, focus on why they should do this, have a clear call to action, like you need to start using this by X date, and use different communication channels, even webinars like this, to give county, right, employees, citizens, suppliers, education. One of the approaches I've seen, if you're in IT, is people go, we're rolling out multi-factor authentication to improve our cybersecurity. That message is true, right? Factually accurate, but it doesn't necessarily motivate the person that doesn't really know what MFA stands for or really know what cybersecurity is, right? I was asked one time by a county elected official what a firewall was, and he's like, I assume it's not a wall on fire. And I was like, no, it's not a wall on fire. So you have to remember who your audience is. What's the level of cyber awareness, cyber knowledge? And the most simple message I give folks that aren't in IT is you're keeping yourself and your colleagues and your county safe, right? It's like having locks on your door or having a car alarm. You're essentially keeping the bad guys out and making sure that nobody has any crime happening or in the county having any brand reputational damage being in the front page of the news, right? So very, very important to think about what motivates the people you're talking to and helping them understand why they have to do this in the first place. Now, in terms of implementing it, the last thing I want to point out is this is an ongoing journey, right? If you're sitting there and you're like, wow, okay, I have to assess everybody, I have to decide what methods, I have to learn all the methods, I have to find solutions, I have to define my security policies, right? Communicate it all. It can seem like a lot. There are ways to take very bite-sized rollout approaches to this. And, you know, some of the folks out there in the poll, when you said some access, that's often what I see, because starting with really high risk areas is not a bad approach, right? You're starting to reduce your risk as much as possible. The other thing is this is always ongoing, right? Attackers get more sophisticated, people change the way that they work. And so it's important that you understand it's always ongoing. Cybersecurity in general is this journey, and it's a journey to maturity and sophistication that you really need to map out. It does require time, right? It does require time and commitment, and it does require funding. There are ways, of course, solutions out there that are affordable. There's great, like we said, grant programs or funding that's available. There's an amazing amount of resources for county government in terms of free resources. And so it's just really important to understand, though, it will take some investment, but it's the same as investing in that front door lock, right? Or that pin pad that you put in, or the doorbell camera that you put in. It's important because it's keeping that front door and the access to everything else very secure and keeping your county safe. So again, multiple chapters, bite-sized rollout, you know, step by step, but make sure that you understand it does take time and some budgetary investment to implement. The last thing I'd highlight, just from the BioKey perspective, we do offer a BioKey Portal Guard. You've heard me probably talk about it. Always happy to talk about it after the event. But we offer one platform that does this all, very, very affordable for county government, and offers all three categories, right? Something you know, something you have, and uniquely something that you are with those identity-bound biometrics. So things like passwordless, you walk up, scan your fingerprint, and you're logged into your computer, right? Very easy to use authentication methods and able to support all kinds of users. One of the catches I would say I see folks getting into is you start with, let's say, a phone-based method or provider for a solution, and then all of a sudden you realize there's a group of people that will not use phones. So then you have to go buy another solution that might offer hardware tokens. And then you have another solution that's free, that's an authentication app on the phone. And so what happens is you get this patchwork quilt of solutions, and also over investment and sometimes overlapping investment and management for IT. So be careful. That's my one recommendation to you. Look for a solution that offers you all three categories of authentication. Look for a partner, not a vendor. You know, some of these big companies, you'll be in support tier 1 for a very long time. And make sure that you really ask the deep questions, right? Ask about your different use cases and how they can solve those and help you be efficient in your MFA strategy. So if you want to learn more, like I mentioned, that nice graph of usability versus security, we have a ranking authentication methods ebook. It does a side-by-side comparison at a high level, and then it also breaks down every single one of those methods to tell you about why it's more secure, why it's more usable, and some of the trade-offs in terms of maintenance and upkeep and cost. And then, of course, I always encourage everybody, request a demo with us. You can contact me privately. I'm more than happy to talk about any MFA strategy that you're trying to implement, and also have some great customers that are happy to speak to you as well if you're wondering about how to do this. So with that, I will wrap up. And Mark, I'll open it up for questions and back to you.
Thank you, Kimberly. That was well done. I appreciate the simplicity, the way you laid that out. For those who don't know on the call, this is Cybersecurity Month, right? And we have, as mentioned, we have a county in New York that is currently has been hacked and is in the throes of they're down, right? All their systems are down, and they're going through the process of figuring out where, what happened, what's infected, and how they can get back up. So this is an acute problem right here with our counties in New York State, and we encourage everybody on the call, and we thank Kimberly for helping to explain this one piece of a big puzzle, right? cybersecurity posture is a puzzle that has lots of pieces, and MFA is one of those pieces. Now, we've been talking cyber insurance a lot at NISAC and with our counties. And the common refrain, Kimberly, is that cyber insurance companies or underwriters are looking to make sure a county or a local government has MFA in order to even qualify for insurance.
Mhm.
Now I'm getting even more in the weeds here, or more detail from those underwriters who are saying it's more than just MFA, right? There's MFA for remote access, and many of our county employees are still sometimes remote and in the office. So MFA for remote access, MFA for email, and then MFA for systems administration, right?
Correct.
So
Yep.
could you prioritize that from your standpoint? What do you think a county or a local government should focus on first of those three categories of MFA?
Yeah, sure. So honestly, privileged access, we call it, right? So keys to the kingdom, things that you have heightened privileges on, your infrastructure, your servers, data center. Those are what they're really talking about when it comes to heightened privileges. I would always stack rank those first. Your IT folks, for example, should be the first to have MFA, and actually true MFA, where there's more than just two factors, is where I would put that. And then remote access, right? As soon as people went remote and were outside the four walls, the way security used to work is we used to say, well, if you're on the county network, then you're trusted. And that's just not the approach that works anymore. And even more so now that, for example, I'm on my home Wi-Fi right now. And so it's really, really important, because a lot of times the hygiene that you have on your county network is not the hygiene that someone has or even knows how to maintain on their house network or on their home network. So that's how I would think about it. You know, kind of the privileged access, remote access. And I apologize, Mark, the third one was the other
Email.
Sorry. Oh, in email. So email is critical to have MFA, but there's also just the system of like, don't click on the links, right? So email is a different challenge in the sense that that's a key attack vector, because they're trying to do phishing, right? They're trying to get you to click links. What happens is once you click on that link and the hacker starts to gain access, they start hitting the front doors of applications and systems. So if MFA is in place there, you can't prevent phishing with multi-factor authentication, but you can prevent them from proliferating across the systems. What you're going to find with cyber insurance is as risk goes up, the requirements are going to only continue to get steeper. So you just need to implement it everywhere. I know that sounds kind of like a lot, but that's where it's headed. If it doesn't get there early next year, I would say by end of next year, if not beginning. And my guess is there's already cyber insurers out there requiring that, because again, they had to pay out a lot more during COVID than they ever expected that they would.
Yeah, that's a good point. The insurance industry has lost money on cyber coverage, right? And so they're increasing their premiums, and they're instituting all kinds of requirements for municipalities, especially to qualify. They deem municipalities as a heightened risk for their insurance companies.
Right.
Can I ask you, is there such a thing called passwordless MFA? And before you answer that, though, I want to remind attendees that if you have a question, Kim is an expert in MFA and cybersecurity. So if you have a question, please type it in your questions panel now. So is there such a thing called passwordless MFA? And if so, what is it, Kim?
Yeah, great question. So look, we don't like passwords. I don't like passwords. I don't know, Mark, do you like passwords? Are they your favorite?
I've got a ton of passwords, and they're all written down in a hard copy. Yeah, exactly. So
my mom has it in a notebook in a drawer. I won't tell you what drawer, very top secret, right? So look, we don't like passwords. The nirvana state is to get away from passwords. Passwordless MFA is very rare when you're seeing promotions and vendors trying to sell passwordless. What ultimately is happening is people are removing the password, but now what they're using is just a single factor like your phone or a one-time code you're typing in. And so look, there's amazing convenience benefits, right? Amazing convenience benefits. I don't have to remember a password. So as a person, I love this solution. From a security perspective, we have to be cautious of what we're moving to when it comes to that. And so what I mean is a password is still something that you have to know. Granted, hackers can figure them out because we keep using the same ones or writing them down, but you still have a human element. The person has to still input it or enter it in or guess it. What we're moving to now are things like phones or tokens. And so, yes, the password's gone, but the only thing that's being authenticated is the device identity, right? So it'd be kind of like if a big iPhone's knocking at your door and you're not sure who's standing behind the iPhone, but you're going to let them in anyway. So we have to just be cautious. True MFA with in a passwordless model is possible. It would be something like a phone plus a fingerprint scan or a hardware token plus a facial recognition, something like that would be true MFA. I highly encourage, you can do single factor, but I recommend strongly a centralized biometric, something that the person is, so that again, you're trusting the person, not a device or a token knocking at your front door.
Great, thank you. And this term zero trust is becoming more common in discussions about cybersecurity. What is required for zero trust?
Sure. Yeah, it's look, it's a cyber buzzword. So just like passwordless. Zero trust is not a one solution or a point in time answer and you're going to be there. The crux of zero trust is never trust, always verify. And honestly, the very first step of zero trust is multi-factor authentication. So if you're implementing it, or some, a lot of folks answered, we already have it, you have the first stage of zero trust. So it's really important to understand that multi-factor is the baseline. That's the first part, and that goes to that front door of access. Now, where zero trust goes from there is to more mature approaches. And I'll go back to the house and the door analogy, right? So MFA at the front door, lots of locks, that's that first piece. The next piece is, let's say someone gets in and goes up to the next room. Let's say there's a door on the bathroom. You want to see, are they allowed to go in the bathroom? Are they able to access? And so that's kind of what we call continuous authentication. In other words, as someone's in a system, are they constantly being authenticated and verified as they go along? So that's a big component of zero trust. The other part of zero trust is what we call context. So if someone's trying to gain access, are they in New York? Are they in the right time of day? Or are they trying to access from Fiji in the middle of the night? And that's just a strange access request and you want to block that. So again, zero trust is a journey. If you're implementing multi-factor authentication, you're on a great path and a great start. Up from there, it goes really to kind of contextual or adaptive authentication and then to continuous authentication. And again, that takes years. That's not something that happens overnight and would be for a much more mature program overall.
All right, I get this question specifically to New York, so I'm going to throw it to you in terms of nationally. If you had to take a guess about how many percentage-wise, how many counties across the U.S. have MFA or some form of MFA, what is it? I can't answer the question for New York, how many counties have MFA. So can you give us a ballpark estimation on there's 3,000 counties in the US. How many of those have MFA or some form of MFA?
Big question mark, curveball. No, so look, organizations outside of county is about 40% don't have it. Unfortunately, sorry, county, I would put you a little higher as not having it. So honestly, it might be 50% may not have it. And I guess you define have it as fully deployed everywhere. That number probably increases. What I've seen, for example, is there's a large portion of counties that are very small. or don't have any IT resources whatsoever. And so I think there's a large portion of county government out there that don't have MFA or don't have it 100% rolled out to all access. Again, that is a guess. So Mark, how about you? What would you ballpark?
That's the answer I usually give, is around 50%, but it's growing. I know it's growing, and it's growing because of communication and raising awareness and education like this, and requirements by insurance companies. So, when the IT directors are talking and when the risk managers are trying to renew their cybersecurity insurance, this is becoming the number one conversation. So I think that's going to increase dramatically over the next 6 to 12 months.
And I think,
Final question.
Oh, sorry.
Final question. On average, how long does it take to implement MFA? So if a county has to renew their cybersecurity insurance and the insurer is saying we won't renew until you have MFA, what's the timetable like there?
Yep, so I have seen it take as little as 30 days, and I've seen it take a year if you have 200,000 employees or something crazy, and those are like large enterprise. On average, 90 days, I think, is about what I've seen. And again, it depends on how many unique user groups you have. To put multi-factor on your most critical systems like IT, 30 days. It's very straightforward to implement. Like I said, the hardest part is deciding what method works for people. But it is doable. I've had plenty of customers come to us, hair on fire, like my renewal is happening in 30 days, and we can make that happen. But yeah, 90 days, I'd say, is about the average that we're seeing at this point.
I want to thank you very much, Kimberly Biddings from BioKey, for spending your time with us today and your expertise in educating our members. I'd like to thank everybody who's listening and participating in this webinar. Thank you for your time. And thank you, Jeanette Stanziano, NISAC's Director of Education and Training, for putting this webinar together today. This is recorded. We will be providing a link to the recording on our website, as well as a link to the slides. Kim is providing her contact information should you want to follow up with her. There are more cyber resources on the NISAC website at nisac.org/cyber. And we have a cybersecurity primer for county leaders. Forthcoming will be cybersecurity insurance challenges for county governments, and the rest of the webinars in this cybersecurity series that's being co-sponsored by NISAC, NICOM, AOT, NYMER, and the Center for Technology and Government. Some of those have been recorded and are available to listen to, and there are some that are scheduled, and you can start to register for those now. Thank you very, very much, everybody. Have a safe Cyber Day.